Hey there, friends and associates, fellow geeks, or people who aren't geeks but are exploring anyway. This is a new YouTube channel that I'm making compared to mine, which is just my first name and last name, and that's more politically focused. But I wanted to make one that's geek focused because, aside from politics, geekdom is a first for me. So, welcome to All Day the Geek Way. Going to be exploring various forms of storytelling, whether it's movies, television, comics, anime, manga, novelizations. Gonna go delve into character development, storytelling, maybe go into spoilers. Actually, I'm going into spoilers for this video here. But welcome. Hopefully, I can get this going. I think it'll be a lot of fun for me, especially because storytelling is very, very important to me. So I'm going to start off this first video talking about a show that I just finished, or I just caught up with, all 14 seasons of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is a phenomenal show. I'm surprised that no one recommended it to me when I was in high school, because I think the show came out in 2005 or 2006, one of the two, with creators Rob McElhenney, Rob McElhenney, produced by Charlie Day, Rob McElhenney, Glenn Howerton, Caitlin Olsen, I believe, and then season 2, Danny DeVito came in later, but they play the primary characters, and it's a phenomenal show. But there was an episode that really, really resonated with me, and that's the end of season 13, that season finale. So, fair warning, this video will have minor spoilers. Everything kind of alludes to the event that's going to happen. For anyone who's actually seen the show, they most likely know I'm. They know which scene I'm talking about. Apparently, it had a lot of criticism to it. I think it was one of the most phenomenal points of storytelling. So, just to give reference for people who haven't seen it, I even recommend watching the scene. It's the scene. So sorry. So throughout the entire, or at least the entire rest of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the first few seasons, the character Mac, he's seen to be straight, and also devout to his religiosity, as a Catholic. And then in later seasons, they start alluding to him being gay, and not only that, but the rest of the gang perceiving him as being gay as well. And the funny thing is, this show is way ahead of its time. This is why I'm kind of mad that people never recommended it to me, even though it's my fault. I always heard of it. It's one of those shows where they use hyperbole on purpose. The characters are very hyperbolic. Not to mention they're very terrible people. So I can only take the show in like certain increments. I can watch a season, then I'm like, I need to rest from this for a little bit because the characters are terrible people. They have their good moments, but for the most part, they're terrible. But to the character Mac, they later allude to him being gay. Like, it's like, does he seem gay to you? Like, that's fine, but it's just. And the only character who was in denial of his homosexuality was Mac. In later seasons, he finally fully comes out. He doesn't go from being gay to retracting it for, whatever methods or whatever purposes that he has. However, the end of season 13, where they try to make a super cool gay pride float, and they want Mac to be the dancer because, he's openly homosexual, not to mention he's ripped as hell, which is, to them it's appealing, to the rest of the everyone else who's going to be at the pride parade. And that's when Rob McElhenney is like ripped. He has like almost 0% body fat. But throughout the course of that episode, it's Frank trying to recruit Mac. But Mac also says he's having a crisis, or he's having trouble identifying himself, and he's not comfortable going on that float because, he can't find his self-identity. And Frank, he has the boomer mentality of like, I don't get it, but we need you for this. I don't get it, but we need you for this. To which Max says, he can't fully embrace his identity until he comes out to his biological father, Luther, who's in prison. His father's kind of a piece of crap, to say the least. And throughout Mac's character development, from season 1 as well, it's been him trying to get the approval of his dad. That's one of the things that he wants the most. And they also allude throughout the episode, he's just like, the only way I can come out to my father isn't just saying it, but it's through an interpretive dance where, like, things are black in the background, it's raining, and a person representing God who's a female. Oh, God's a female? Yeah, in my mind, God's a female, especially for this particular interpretive dance that I have. So they make a bunch of allusions to the end of it, and if anyone knows It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, that show really pushes the boundaries, and they really put comedic relief into it. I think that show's way ahead of its time, to be honest. It was going into racial issues and race, not just racial issues, but issues pertaining to homosexuality, issues pertaining to abortion, gun control. Like, the show really pushes the boundaries, and actually some of the best episodes are when they're intentionally pushing those boundaries and not just doing it for comedic effect, but they incorporate comedy to show the most hyperbolic points of views. It's a very cynical show, to be honest, but it's funny, and I recommend it to anyone. So this particular episode that I'm talking about, that season finale of season 13, it's really them pushing those boundaries. Like, everything is comedic, and Frank's like trying to stop the bleeding going on in his head since the apartment door at the beginning of the episode hit Frank's face, and it keeps bleeding out of his nose, and he keeps trying to stop the bleeding. It's a metaphor. There's a lot of metaphors incorporated in the episode. Got to give credit to Charlie Day and Rob McElhenney for writing this episode. It was phenomenal, and it's been resonating with me for days now since I finished it. So, getting to the actual substance at hand, it's that interpretive dance. The very beginning of the interpretive dance, it's it's Mac, whose real name is Ronald McDonald, but they call him Mac, and his dad just kind of laughs, going like, "Yeah, I named him," like playing it off as a joke. But Mac really does want that approval from his father, and from the very beginning of it, he says, "Dad, I'm gay." The lights shut off, and the first thing you see is you hear like the pitter-patter of rain, and everything is black in the background. Rain is falling, and what you see is Mac sitting there by himself, almost in loathing. So, again, I want to keep everyone to keep in mind, this is interpretation, even though the episode does purposely make allusions as to how that dance is to be interpreted. There is still more interpretation to be given. So if anyone else can add on, I would love that. That'd be so much fun. But anyway, Mac is loathing by himself, and there's blackness and rain. Now, this blackness and rain, along with his loathing, is meant to represent his inner turmoil, with being a homosexual, with him wanting to be accepted by his father, and also his religiosity and maintaining his faith while being a closeted, or in this case, an out homosexual. But the beginning of it immediately is God, represented by a woman, and I should have researched her name. She's a phenomenal dancer. I have to look this up. If I remember, I'm going to put it in the description. But at the moment, I don't know her name. It's God as a woman who comes up from behind Mac and puts her arms over her, like around his neck, over his shoulders in an embrace, followed by Mac turning his head, but as if in sorrow, about to break down. And Mac is dancing with God, and at the same time, you see camera shots. So, throughout, something else I'm going to get into super fast before I get back into the main subject, is there's a clear difference in cinematography from the end of this episode compared to all the rest of the cinematography used in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. This is where you can tell there's a more theatrical cinematography, as though to relay a larger message. Like, this scene isn't a joke. You would think, because at the end of every other season, there's been a huge joke. But this is the one where the audience kind of says, like, what's the joke here? And Rob McElhenney and Charlie Day are basically saying, as writers, that there's no punchline here. Like, this is 100% serious. So with the cinematography and the camera work, you see the camera will occasionally pan onto Frank and onto Luther. And a lot of the times, Frank looking at Luther briefly to see the reaction and going back and watching Mac dance with this person. Now, this dance that they have, it's very sensual in the sense of there's sort of an embrace with God. There's an intimacy with God. And it's almost, I don't want to say erotic, but there's erotic tendencies, I guess you could say. There is an eroticism. That word is really hard to say out loud. But it's also meant that sexual, or the more not provocative, it's not really provocative at all, but that more sensual dancing, it's this disambiguation, or duality, not duality, I'm sorry, but it's the relationship between his sexuality and his relationship with God. Like, occasionally their faces will be about this close, almost in a sensual embrace. And then at one point, Mac gently puts God on the ground. She's lying on her stomach, and it shows Mac facing his dad, sitting toward and looking at his dad. And the scene right after, the camera pans to Luther, who gets up and walks out of the audience. By the way, they're in a prison, so it's the audience full of prisoners. Like I said, Luther is a prisoner. Everyone is sitting there mesmerized while Luther gets up, almost shameful, and walks out of the room. And Frank looks over and he looks back. And this is like Rob McElhenney at some of his best acting, because it's him turning his head down and you hear him weeping. You don't really see his face, but you know he's weeping. It's not just part of the interpretive dance, but it's also him being rejected by his father. And that's very symbolic, especially with what a lot of people have had to deal with in the LGBTQ plus community. A lot of those people, they're rejected by their family. It's a big statement. It's a huge statement. Though what happens as he's weeping is God gets up and comes back toward Mac. This is symbolic toward his faith and what his faith represents to him, and how his faith gives him a sense of identity. The dance continues, and it's more, you'll see some of the dancing. God will have her legs wrapped around Mac, and he's embracing her, while also moving his body in certain flowing motions as her hand goes into the water, and the water reacts and sort of flows up into the air. And then the woman playing God has, she's kind of sitting on the ground, but she's being ready to be spun around. And Mac, I should say, I'm sorry, is spinning God around for a brief few seconds, and then followed by lets her go, and she's sliding onto the ground, as though to actually be symbolic about how, with his identity as a homosexual, God is sliding away from him, and he also slides in the other direction and turns around, faces towards God, and is in that kneeling, sitting position that he had at the very beginning of the interpretive dance. But at the same time, God and him, they stand up at the same time, and she comes running at him, jumping into the air, and she's facing horizontal, and he grabs her in the air. They spin around a few times, and then in a singular motion, Mac has God on her shoulders, and he lifts her up. So let's look at that for a second. God comes running back to Mac. This isn't to say like God needs Mac or anything, that's ridiculous, but it's more to say that Mac, no matter how he identifies, he's always going to maintain his faith because God is always going to accept him and come back to him, even when he feels the most abandoned, and even when he distances himself from his faith. And this was incredible to see. And when he has God, raises God, it's him saying, like, I'm going to maintain my Catholic faith and my faith in God because God hasn't abandoned me. And immediately up after that, he puts God down, kind of cradles her, puts her on the ground, and the next thing you know, it's Mac lying on the ground, and he puts his chest in her bosom and kind of holds around her waist as though he is struggling with this internal anguish, who he's come out to be and how to accept it. But the next words that you hear are the lady kind of scratching his head going, "It's okay. It's okay." They're saying "it's okay" over and over again. This is God accepting Mac no matter how he identifies. Him being gay, God will still accept him. So that faith is always going to be a big part of who Mac is. Him fighting this inner turmoil and struggling with his identity, but there is a solid basis on who he is, and that's through his faith. Now, one of the best portions of this episode is Frank, played by Danny DeVito. Now, I know Danny DeVito has been acting for decades. He's an incredible actor. He's been acting for decades, and he does phenomenal work. And then you watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and he plays a terrible person, and he's hilarious. He is so funny. Though the last 20 seconds of the episode, 20 or 25 seconds, the camera zooms into Frank's face when he's mesmerized, and he says, "Oh my God, I get it." Because the entire episode, Frank has been saying, I don't understand. I don't get it. Like, what's the big deal?" And then Frank finally says, "I get it." And I can't describe it, but Danny DeVito, that 20 seconds, he should have gotten an award. He should have. It was phenomenal. It was incredible, actually. And just him saying multiple times, "I get it," followed by him clapping and all of the prisoners. It's a round of applause, standing ovation. And Frank's among those people. Not that there has been too much emphasis on the prisoners. It was just the setting. Though, it was funny that everyone else was able to accept him too and be moved by this dance. And as much as it was Mac coming out to Luther, his dad, it was also a big part of Mac coming out to Frank and saying, "This is what I'm feeling." And Frank is one of the most terrible characters. Like, he's a terrible human being. But that moment where he says, "Yeah, I get it." Like, it was him coming out to Frank just as much as it was to Luther and being able to accept his identity. I don't know. These 5 minutes have stood out to me for days. It's incredible. In fact, I'm likely going to put a link to this exact scene at the bottom because I don't think it's a spoiler. I think it's a well-executed expression on how someone has dealt with their identity and facing potential rejection. Not just from a parent or a family member or anyone else or from friends, but also how it affects their faith and their religiosity. And being able to cope with that as part of their identity. It was amazing. That's visual storytelling at some of its best. Hands down. Hands down. It was awesome. So if you have the chance to watch it, I do recommend It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Man, if you just want to watch every episode that leads up until season 13, do it. It all builds well, and Mac has the best character progression of all the characters in the series. There's actually like a full character arc, even though it takes multiple seasons. So, yeah, that's all I want to talk about at the moment. I could go more into this, but I think I'm good. A little bit past 20 minutes. Well, welcome to All Day the Geek Way. Let's keep it this way. So, hope you enjoyed yourself. If you haven't yet, please like, put a comment there, maybe subscribe even. I enjoy geek culture. I enjoy storytelling. This is my thing. Aside from politics, but I'm not getting into that in this channel. So in the meantime, my dudes, take care, have fun, enjoy storytelling, know the messages, or interpret the messages. Have fun with it. I'll talk to y'all soon.